Hello, I am Dargis, engineer, general contractor, and impartial advisor in construction and real estate investment in Quebec. Today I want to talk to you about the theme advice before selling or buying a building in Quebec, whether it is a house, a condo, a multi-unit dwelling, or even a commercial building. I mention Quebec in particular because some points are specifically addressed to the province of Quebec. I will divide my advice into two categories, the seller side and the buyer side. Here is first a small introduction to my advice before selling or buying a building in Quebec. So I would like to draw your attention to the importance of transparency, professionalism, and rigor, but also of ponderation before making decisions. It should be understood that a house of several years of age can have certain imperfections. You should not panic, therefore, at the smallest sign of imperfection, and you should know how to show level-headedness and common sense in accordance with your expectation, your budgets, and by obtaining as clear a vision as possible of the building according to what is visible and accessible, with the advice of impartial, experienced experts. One important thing to remember is the importance of transparency towards others and to yourself. I'll come back to that later. You will even have to go beyond transparency, honesty in giving information, and good faith. It is not enough to have good intentions when you want to sell a property. So it is not only a question of being honest and transparent by giving all the information available on the building, but in addition to doing four useful things. First, doing a pre-purchase inspection to search and find out if possibly there might be any hidden information under the eye of a layman which can contain potential problems. Second, checking the contract of sale or purchase, and third, drafting and keeping up to date the building logbook by an impartial expert witness from the start of the acquisition of the building, which contains the periodic report on the development of the building, with or without problems, repairs, its modification, who did the work, when, and how, an impartial structural architectural history of the building. We will come back to this later, including the report writings, maintenance recommendations, photos, plans, findings, approvals, etc. Fourth, to be accompanied by and to have an expert impartial building advisor for all stages, sales, technical aspects, contracts, someone of experience with a great human character, who cares more about your interest than about his fees or his professional image in trying to impress the gallery, or by incompetence, through lighting alert lights on superficial details. I mentioned these four elements or these four tools in order to protect you as a buyer or a seller. As we know, sellers and buyers often have very good intentions, but there may be bad discoveries in the future that can open the door to all kinds of expenditures, misinterpretations, and lawsuits. Transparency is important, so try to avoid hiding information if you are a seller, and if you are a buyer, better express your doubts to prevent serious consequences in the future. It is essential not only as a seller to tell the truth about the building rather than hide things and then be accused of a hidden defect, then if you are a buyer, express your concerns about certain aspects of the building, its foundation, cracks, humidity, so that the seller can answer your doubts. It is not just about working on price negotiation, but also about peace of mind after the purchase in order to avoid unexpected expenses and losses. For this, you should know that the four important points are as follows: the pre-purchase inspection, the drafting and verification of the contract of purchase or sale, the building's logbook with its history, and support throughout the process by a trustworthy and experienced impartial expert advisor. So let us start, therefore, with the seller's side. 8 tips for the seller before selling. The first piece of advice may seem a bit ridiculous to you at first, and you certainly won't hear it from a real estate broker. First, is it worth selling? As much on the financial side as for the fun of it on the human side. When I spoke about transparency towards oneself, I meant that you should know how to introspect yourself with rigor. It is important to ask yourself the necessary questions with an impartial expert, not to someone who makes you sell. Here are some examples of questions to ask yourself, especially if it involves a major lifestyle change. If your house is already completely paid for and you are comfortable in your neighborhood, will you be better off elsewhere in a completely different environment? For instance, if you are moving from a townhouse in the city to, let's say, a condo, a retirement home, or into the countryside. Wouldn't it make more sense to find out first by temporarily renting a similar place for a few months to see if you would like it? If you are selling to make a capital gain in order to build yourself something elsewhere, and this is your first experience as a self-builder, have you carefully assessed the construction cost with an impartial expert? Not with building contractors who promise you enticing prices and who change their mind about these along the way. Have you consulted all your family members first? When I spoke about the human side, I know this is a delicate question to address because a move can cause friction and conflict. For children who have to change friends, schools, environment. And this especially if it happens repeatedly. It can also be important for personal development and adaptive learning. I experienced it myself with my parents when I was very young, when we moved more than 23 times before I was even 18 years old. Over time, these trials can often turn into beautiful life surprises and build character. Various other questions to ask yourself with an impartial experienced advisor with a human and common sense who cares more about your well-being than about the commission or profit obtained from your transactions. It is important to find such an impartial advisor who has a heart in your vicinity, who is not just an expert with lots of technical knowledge, but someone with experience who will assist with you and your family all the good and bad sides with the help of his life experience and his knowledge of real estate. This to ensure that the decision to sell is made as much as possible in common agreement and in peace of mind. Such an advisor is not easy to find and is worth his weight in gold, believe me. Second tip, once it is certain that you want to sell, obvious things you do or think about when you want to sell. Cleaning, home staging, or minor renovation. In general, it is better to limit oneself to a good cleaning, a home staging decoration, or a small renovation. So, before selling, clean your house well and put it in order and ultimately make some basic repairs. For instance, plaster repairs, cracks. However, you should know that this can be seen by a future buyer as a gesture to hide signs of building instability. It is sometimes good to see the reverse side of the coin and to play the game of transparency by doing nothing besides cleaning to demonstrate that we are not trying to hide defects. If, for instance, the house has not been repainted for years and it is without crack, this is a very good indication of structural stability and good environmental management. So it depends of the clients you will be dealing with and your sales strategy. Third, determining the sales price. In addition to doing your own search of comparables in the neighborhood, you can call upon an approved appraiser, a real estate broker, or any of the kind, and by consulting the Registre foncier du Québec, Land Register of Quebec. Fourth, still as advice to sellers, you should choose the right sales strategy, either by taking care of the sale yourself or with a real estate broker. It is certain that if you want to sell your house yourself, you will have to manage advertising, buyer visits, negotiation, the contract of sales with a notary or an attorney, and you should especially know the laws in Quebec. You should always be advised by an impartial expert who knows construction and buildings laws in general well and who has good contacts among lawyers, notaries, appraisers, and others. People with experience who are trustworthy. If, on the other hand, you do business with a real estate broker, ask him for a periodic report to make sure that he takes good care of your business. Fifth, check the contract of sale with an attorney or a notary, especially if you decide to sell your house yourself and if it has structural irregularities, to avoid being sued for hidden defects when you have good intentions. And even if you are selling through a real estate broker, it is still good to check the contract of sale with a lawyer or a notary. Sixth advice for sellers: it is better to sell your property before buying another one. Therefore, sell before buying a new property. Unless you can afford to maintain multiple buildings simultaneously, you probably wouldn't want to end up with two mortgages to pay and pushed to sell for less profit. One of the things, if not the most important thing, that almost nobody does is to prepare yourself for selling from the first day of your purchase, which brings me to talk about the seventh advice: keep the building logbook with all the details on the building up to date. What is there in the building logbook? Classified by date, defects that have appeared, like cracks, slope of the floor, walls, etc. Modifications, photos, plans of the building, tax bills, heating, electricity, and maintenance bills, etc. A wealth of information that better explains when, how, and why problems, changes, and renovation have appeared. Also, who carried out the work: the building contractor with his license, or the owner, which impartial expert made the plans and advised the work, and who inspect the work with the compliance letters. A wealth of information that will serve to demonstrate not only your transparency, but the good management of the building and your good faith. It may be that the building over time is damaged, not only by poor management thereof, but also by natural degradation or by external phenomena beyond your control, such as work in the vicinity, climatic phenomena, or ground movements. This building logbook is always drafted by one or more impartial external experts so that the owner has a reliable witness. Among the important elements of this building logbook, we find the certificate of location, contracts of purchase or sale, buildings plans, architecture, structure, report of an approved appraiser, Quebec land registered document with the history of all transactions since its construction, list of irregularities over time with photos by an impartial expert engineer, list of modification, renovation, and repairs, tax accounts, heating, electricity bills, etc., and so much more. You will understand that this building logbook, kept up to date by an impartial expert, is a precious, essential tool to properly inform the people with whom you are talking and to protect yourself. It's a bit like going to the physician and having a medical record. Instead of a medical record, it's a building record called the building logbook. And finally, the eighth advice for sellers. As there are a lot of things to manage, it is preferable to always have a support person, a trustworthy, impartial expert advisor without bias, in addition to have a real estate broker who himself may rather tend to push you to sell your property in order to get a commission. So, it is good to have access to an impartial expert advisor who knows all the steps, someone with strong experience in constructions, buildings, with various contacts, someone who can give advice in all stages: inspection, renovation, marketing, contracts, negotiations, and all of this with a human touch. Now on the buyer side, 9 tips or advice before buying. First, I have already mentioned it, and this applies as much to the buyer as to the seller. Is it worth buying the property? As much on the financial side as for the fun of it on the human side. I will not repeat it. The same advice applies to the buyer side as to the seller side. Secondly, I already mentioned it, and this applies as much to the buyer as to the seller. If you are already an owner, it is advisable to sell your property before buying a new one, unless you can afford to maintain multiple buildings simultaneously. Third, checking the sales price. Ask for advice from real estate experts such as a real estate broker, an approved appraiser in order to know the value of the building well. The City of Montreal has an excellent public register of buildings on the internet that provides various information about your building and others. There are also other useful registers on the internet that provide information on real estate transactions, such as the Land Registry of Quebec and the solutions.glr.ca website. Fourthly, as a buyer, you should inspect the building well. First, ask for the inspection of the building by an accredited general building inspector. Ask for the inspector's references. It is preferable to obtain the name of an inspector from a building inspection association or from an impartial building expert, such as an architect, engineer, or another person who knows the inspector's reputation well. Then, if the general building inspector detects structural anomalies which are outside this field of competence, and recommends the advice of an engineer, then contact an engineer. Once the inspector and the engineer have informed you on the list of possible corrections to be made and on what this implies in terms of times, deadlines, inconvenience, plans, permit requests, specialized contractors, you definitely will want to know the price for these corrective works in order to negotiate the purchase price.
Entrepreneur spécialisé, vous désirerez certainement connaître le prix pour ces travaux correctifs afin de négocier le prix d'achat.
Therefore, fifth, verify the price of the repairs by having the scope of work of an impartial expert, engineer, architect, independent construction consultant, who is not a bidding contractor, at hand. It is important to have a step-by-step detailed scope of work, especially if the work is important. Entrepreneurs, as we know, often tend to dramatize situations in order to inflate their invoices unnecessarily. With a scope of work in hand, all contractors who give an estimation will have to follow the same corrected specification. This makes it possible to compare prices. If there are large price differences between the bids, please do nothing before contacting the impartial expert who drafts the scope of work for you to verify where these large price differences come from.
Contactez l'expert impartial qui a rédigé pour vous le devis afin de vérifier d'où viennent les écarts de prix importants.
It is possible that one of the contractors, for instance, does not calculate particular work according to Quebec labor laws and that he gets ready to not pay his employees according to the Quebec labor code. This can cause you big problems when actually carrying out the work. By the way, if you are the buyers and if you have already made the purchase and you discover irregularities and you plan to take the initiative to repair the defects and then claim compensation, be careful, however, not to rely only on the advice of an entrepreneur who is not impartial and who may offer unless and expensive work. Rather, trust an impartial consultant expert, such as an engineer, an architect, who will be your witness and who will inspect the work from start to finish with a compliance letter. Sixth, check with the municipality. If your intention is to carry out major work on the building you wish to buy, for instance, like digging a basement, adding a floor, a mezzanine, or even demolish it entirely to build a new one, be aware that being the owner of a building in Quebec does not give you all the rights to the buildings and that you must first respect the zoning bylaws. So, consult the permit office first. And even if you do not intend to carry out major work, it is always good to still go visit the permit office to find out if there is important work to come around your building, which can influence your quality of life and your future taxes to pay. These are all things you should think about. Seventh, yet another advice for the buyer, check the contract of sales with a lawyer, a notary, or other impartial technical professionals on all aspects. technical, legal, and others. Do not trust the ready-made contracts offered by the seller, a real estate broker, which you find on the internet, or another person, especially if the building is old, showing sign of structural or other irregularities, and if it is possible to discover there after purchase, during renovation works, problems that were not visible before the purchase, which may be a reason for unexpected expenses and lawsuits. So, check the drafting of the contract of sale. Ask, if need be, for the advice of impartial experts who have no interest in the purchase or sale transaction, no commission or profit to be made other than their professional fees. Be careful with professionals who offer free services in order to possibly get a commission or get jobs. So, in addition to a lawyer or notary, you can also ask the opinion of technical building experts to think about including points in the contract that the lawyer or the notary are not aware of. For instance, you can contact an impartial real estate broker who has no interest in the sale for advice on the reasonable price, payment methods, sales techniques, or other. An engineer, architect, approved appraiser, a building inspector, a general contractor, not for free, for more technical information, or at the most, the list of reasonable corrective work to be considered, scope of work summary, taking into account the visible and accessible elements available during the visit. And of course, you should finally contact a lawyer or a notary concerning the drafting of the deed, the contract, to protect yourself. 8. I have already talked about it. Ask the seller for the building logbook with all the information relating to the history of the building that I list before, and especially if there have been any modification made to the building, an extension, removal of load-bearing walls, etc. Make sure that the seller provides you with the compliance letters for the work by an engineer. Preferably, also make sure that the contractor who did the work has a valid RBQ license and that he has funds in his company in case of recourse. Finally, 9th, again, as much as a buyer as a seller, as there are a lot of things to manage, it is preferable to have always one support person, a trust, impartial expert advisor, without bias, in addition to a real estate broker who may tend to incite you to sell in order to get a commission. So, it is good to have access to an expert who knows by experience all the steps to be taken, with strong experience in construction, buildings, with several contacts, who can advise you in all stages: inspection, renovation, marketing, contracts, negotiation, and above all, with a good common sense and a human side.
Rénovation, le marketing, les contrats, les négociations, et surtout avec un côté humain.
This is one of the things I do regularly as an engineer and impartial expert advisor, helping you in developing the building logbook and in supporting you in all stages. This was my presentation on advice before selling or buying a building in Quebec. This video is, in a way, one of the stages in the preparation for the sale or purchase of a building in order to better inform you. It is like a list of things to think about to avoid problems as much as possible by being well supported and having the right documents, by avoiding misinterpretation and conflicts, by being transparent and making the right decision in an informed and level-headed way with ponderation.
d'une façon éclairée et pondérée.
You can see many more of these information videos on Facebook Construction Daniel Dargis, also by searching on YouTube Daniel Dargis Engineer, and on the following websites: dargisconstruction.com, ingénieurstructurebâtiment.com, and businesstripcanada.com.
Et businesstripcanada.com.
Do not hesitate to contact me. I am Daniel Dargis, engineer, general contractor, CCQ master carpenter, and impartial advisor in the construction and real estate sector in Quebec since 1989. Thank you, and see you soon.